Talking debt this morning, the House may be out for summer recess, but that does not mean that the debate over spending and taxes takes a rest. We are joined this morning by Congressman Peter Roskam and Congressman Frank Pallone. And Congressman Roskam, you are calling today, Wednesday, August 4th, Debt Dependence Day. Why is that? Well, it's Debt Dependence Day because today is the first day of the rest of the year where the entire federal government is paid for by borrowed money. We're 59% of the way into this 2010 year, and this majority has sort of slinked out of Washington, D.C. and hasn't passed a budget. And as a result, not just not passing a budget, but the nature of this spending is ultimately having a huge drag on the economy. So it's Debt Dependence Day. It's not the 4th of July. It's the 4th of August. And it's a day that I think is a pretty sobering reminder about the lack of leadership that we see coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. Congressman Pallone, your response?
Well, the Republican leadership caused the deficit. You know, they run up big bills for all the wars they want to pay for. They don't want to pay for anything. They want to give tax cuts to the wealthy and millionaires, and they don't want to pay for anything at all. So, I mean, it's their economic policies that cause the recession and cause us to get into this deficit. And Democrats every day, we instituted PAYGO. We're trying to pay for everything as much as we can. And our policies, you know, whether it's in terms of manufacturing or trying to encourage hiring the unemployed. We're trying to create jobs, but we get stopped every time because the Republicans won't give us any votes for our economic policies, which are leading to a recovery.
Congressman Pallone, are you concerned about the deficit, though?
Of course we have to be concerned about the deficit, but Republican policies would only make it worse. I mean, they have this Economic Freedom Act that would increase the deficit by $10 trillion over the next 10 years, and they keep spending money on defense. I mean, we have to cut back on defense spending. We can't afford these wars, and at the same time, we have to adopt policies that give tax cuts to the middle class. We passed the Recovery Act last week that was the largest tax cut for the middle class in history. If you give money back to middle class people, they spend it. If you give it to the wealthy, they don't. And so, you know, the policies that have caused this deficit are basically from the Republican leadership, and they want to continue it.
Congressman Roskam, there is a huge debate. Do you give tax cuts out to the wealthiest Americans? Do you give them out to the middle class? And how do you combine all of that with this idea of some sort of a balanced budget? There are some who say, look, it's got to be spending cuts, and you can't, at this point, consider a different tax structure. What do you think?
Well, I understand. I think there's a couple of things just to set the record straight. First of all, on defense spending, by and large, Republicans in Congress are supporting President Obama and what he's trying to do and trying to not turn this into a partisan issue. But look, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and we're now 7 months into the year, and there's complete ambiguity about what the tax code is going to be. So the Democrat majority, with all due respect to Frank, has not made clear what they intend for tax policies to be. So they're looking, middle class and lower economic voters are looking at the possibility of tax hikes going up when the 2001 and the 2003 tax increases or those tax cuts expire. So there is so much ambiguity out there and so much uncertainty that, as you know, and has been reported on this show, there's a whole lot of capital that's on the sidelines, capital that's unwilling to come into the marketplace because they don't know what the tax code's going to be. They don't know what regulations are going to be on health care or energy or financial services, and there is so much stress that folks don't know if they're afoot or horseback right now. So I think it's time for Congress to sort of set aside some of these hackneyed old arguments that get trotted out every few years, and for the majority to take responsibility. Look, they've got super majorities in both chambers, in the House and in the Senate. There's no ambiguity about who's in charge. The ambiguity is about an uncertainty in the future, particularly as it relates to tax policy.
Congressman Pallone, what about that uncertainty argument that we hear from business all the time?
I don't think there's any uncertainty at all. The president has said over and over again that he wants to continue the tax cuts for people who make under $250,000 a year, and he's going to let them expire for people who make over that and for the corporations. So clearly he's saying, look, we gave a huge tax cut to the middle class last year in the Recovery Act, and we're going to continue those tax cuts for people that make under $250,000 a year.
There is quite a bit of uncertainty. There is quite a bit of uncertainty about what's going to happen with capital gains. I mean, are we talking about that going to 20%? Are we talking about it going to 45%? There's a lot of uncertainty in the tax policy right now for people and for companies that are trying to plan what they're going to be expected to pay.
Well, look, the Republican study group just came out with a report saying that they are going to eliminate the capital gains cut altogether. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to do that. But I think if you look at what the Democrats have done over the last few months, I mean, basically we've been trying to plug up a lot of loopholes, trying to prevent jobs from going overseas, trying to encourage companies to hire here. We have the HIRE Act. If you hire the unemployed, you get major tax credit. The president on Thursday is going to sign a major new proposal with regard to manufacturing to try to prevent jobs from going overseas and plug up a lot of those loopholes. And I think he's been very clear about what he wants to do in terms of the Bush tax policies, which is, as I said, if you're making under $250,000 a year, the tax cuts will continue. If you're making over that, they will not. And that's going to save a lot of money and bring down the deficit. I mean, you're talking about $1 trillion if you just implement, you know, what the president says about the Bush tax cuts. You'd save $1 trillion.
Look, one quick point. We're 7 months into this year, and the research and development tax credit hasn't been settled at all. There's complete ambiguity about international tax deferral rules. Companies are not going to know whether to file these taxes this year, open up and do returns again. And, you know, I represent a district outside of Chicago, and an R&D tax credit has a huge impact. And at this point, based on conversations I've had literally with dozens of business leaders in Chicagoland, they don't know if they're a foot or horseback on this thing. So there's a great deal of uncertainty that's come out of
a lot of the problems stem from the fact that when we pass bills in the House, as you know, we can't get the 60 votes in the Senate because we don't have the Republican
that argument
support.
doesn't work anymore. That argument doesn't work anymore. When the Democrats decided that they wanted to pass a very, very controversial health care bill, you know what they did? They hit the launch codes and they passed the bill. So the idea of ducking and weaving now, the idea of ducking and weaving and saying that we're stymied by Republicans when we want to be, and that's arguing in the alternative. Right. And those days are gone.
The health care bill is one of the pieces of legislation that the president signed that's going to save money and reduce the deficit.
Except for
according to the CBO, but that's also according to 7 years of spending and 10 years of taxing on it. So there is some differences.
But we have to go by the CBO. We don't have a choice.
The CBO has to go by the numbers that they're given. I mean, obviously, we'll see how this shakes out over the next 10 years. But I would say we probably don't have a great idea.
But
look, but here's the point: the national debt.
But that's what we have to use.
The national debt under this administration and with this Congress, based on the administration's own numbers, will triple in 10 years. And I think it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You look at this debt cascade that we're upon, and it's something that has to be dealt with.
I just want to know, real quickly, your estimate of how much of the tripling of the deficit results from the economy turning down and how much from spending policies?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think you've got to say that there's an economic slowdown without question. But look, when you look at the entitlement spending that is built into the Obamacare bill, it is absolutely enormous. If you look at sort of the transfer payments,
but the health care bill saves money and reduces the deficit.
Look, I mean that's a tired old argument that really hasn't come out to fruition.
Well, I'm only going by CBO. What else do you want me to use?
Well, look, as Becky made the point, it's 7 years of taxes and 10 years of spending.
You know what I mean? I ask this question earnestly here. I really want to know how much, as an American citizen, should I blame the Obama administration for spending profligately, that's the right word, versus how much is from the economic downturn?
Let me give you a 15.
If I could try to answer that, I would say this. We had to spend some money in order to get out of this recession. I mean, obviously, you know, we had a big debate last week over unemployment compensation. You have to give people money if they're unemployed so that they can pay for their food and spend it. And some of the money that we spent has been to try to eliminate the recession and help people in the middle of the recession. You have to spend some money. But I think over the long term, the Obama economic policies will get us out of the deficit and at the same time, you know, encourage new manufacturing, creation of new jobs.
Look, the Obama...
Take a stab at the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, the Obama administration has basically, by their own admission, said that they're tripling the national debt. So that's OMB numbers and that's CBO numbers. So, but your question is, how much is economic slowdown and how much is new spending? I would say the lion's share of this problem is new spending. Before testimony before President Obama's own Debt Commission says that our debt to GDP ratio is now so out of sync that it's costing us $1 million or 1 million jobs every year. And my point is, look, we can do better. You look at the stimulus, and there's very few people in the Chicago area that are saying, hip, hip, hooray for the stimulus. It just classically is underperformed.
The stimulus had the biggest
biggest
tax increase in American history.
Even John Maynard Keynes said if you spend money, you should get something for it.
I want to thank you both for joining us and having a very lively debate. We appreciate your time this morning, Congressman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Yeah, that was interesting.